Young Millionaire thought he was marrying an ugly woman through an arranged marriage, but when she removed her veil, he was shocked by what he saw. The dining room of the sprawling estate was bathed in soft golden light from the crystal chandelier hanging overhead. The table, long enough to seat 20, was set with fine china and silverware, though only 3 chairs were occupied. David sat at one end, his posture relaxed but his jaw tight with annoyance. Across from him, his father sipped a glass of wine, the very picture of composure, while his mother watched him closely, her hands folded neatly on the table. "This isn't happening," David said, breaking the tense silence. He pushed his plate aside, the untouched steak now cold. "You can't be serious." "David," his father began, his tone measured, "this isn't a request. It's a decision that has already been made." David leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. "A decision made without me. How generous." "Enough with the sarcasm," his mother said sharply. "This isn't just about you. It's about the family. About preserving what we've built." David's eyes narrowed. "And the way to preserve it is by marrying me off like it's the 18th century. To a woman I've never even met." "You'll meet her soon enough," his father said, setting down his glass. "Anna is a respectable young woman from a good family. This arrangement benefits everyone." David scoffed, shaking his head. "Good family, huh? Is that why she hides behind a veil? What's she hiding? A scar? A secret identity?" "Don't be cruel," his mother snapped, her voice icy. "Anna is a private person, and she has her reasons. She doesn't owe you an explanation." "No, but apparently I owe her a lifetime," David shot back. "Why me? Why not let her marry someone else who's willing to play along?" "Because you're the heir to this family, David," his father said firmly. "And the Whitmans are critical to our business. This marriage is as much a partnership as it is a union." David let out a dry laugh. "So it's a transaction. Great. Love clearly has no place here." "Don't be dramatic," his mother said, her voice softening slightly. "You're not being asked to love her. Just to respect her and fulfill your duty." David's hands clenched into fists on the table. "My duty? To marry a stranger? To give up any chance of choosing my own future?" "You'll have everything you could ever need," his father said calmly. "And so will she." David stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need this," he said, his voice low and simmering with anger. "I don't need her." "You'll meet her tomorrow," his mother said, standing as well. Her voice carried an air of finality. "At dinner. And I expect you to behave like the man we raised you to be." David stared at her, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned and strode out of the dining room, the weight of their expectations pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. Upstairs in his room, David poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The anger coursing through him was sharp and unrelenting. An arranged marriage, to a woman who wouldn't even show her face. It felt like a bad joke, a relic from a time long past. He downed the whiskey in one gulp, the burn doing little to dull the edge of his frustration. Tomorrow, he thought bitterly. Tomorrow he would meet this Anna and see what kind of game his parents were playing. One thing was certain, he wasn't going to make this easy for anyone. The next evening, the Whitman estate was abuzz with quiet activity as the staff prepared for the dinner. David arrived in his parents' formal sitting room, his expression carefully neutral, though his frustration simmered beneath the surface. His father greeted him with a nod while his mother offered a tight-lipped smile. "She'll be here shortly," she said, smoothing her dress. "Wonderful," David muttered under his breath, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. Moments later, the sound of heels clicking against the polished floor drew their attention. David looked up as a woman entered, escorted by an older man he recognized as one of the Whitman patriarchs. She moved with grace, her posture straight and composed. A long veil covered her face, flowing down to her shoulders, leaving only her strikingly sharp eyes visible. They were an unusual shade of gray, bright and piercing, almost as if they could see through him. "David," his mother said, stepping forward with a welcoming smile. "This is Anna." Anna inclined her head slightly, her voice calm and measured. "It's a pleasure to meet you, David." David hesitated, his gaze fixed on her veil. He extended his hand automatically, but his mind was racing. "Likewise," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. They were seated around the dining table, the atmosphere stilted and formal. David found it impossible to focus on the small talk being exchanged between their parents. His attention kept drifting back to Anna, to her stillness, her measured responses. and most of all to the veil that obscured her face. Halfway through dinner, David could no longer contain his irritation. He set down his fork and turned to Anna, his voice low but pointed. "You don't have to keep that on, you know. No one here is going to judge you." His mother shot him a warning glance, but Anna remained unbothered. Her eyes flicked toward him, calm and steady. "I appreciate your concern," she said softly, "but I prefer to keep it on." David raised an eyebrow. "Why? Are you hiding something?" "David," his mother hissed, her tone sharp with disapproval. "It's fine," Anna said, her voice never wavering. She turned to David, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not hiding anything that matters. What's under the veil isn't relevant to our arrangement." David leaned back in his chair, his arms crossing over his chest. "Arrangement. That's an interesting word for marriage." Anna tilted her head slightly, her tone unflinching. "Isn't that what this is? An arrangement? Your parents need an alliance, and my family needs the same. There's no need to complicate it with unnecessary emotions or expectations." Her words landed like a slap, leaving David momentarily stunned. "So that's how you see it," he said, his voice edged with sarcasm. "No love, no compassion, just a business deal." Anna's gaze didn't falter. "Do you believe otherwise?" David opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, he felt a wave of frustration and confusion. She was so calm, so composed, as if this entire situation didn't bother her at all. "I want to know who I'm marrying," he said finally, his voice quieter but no less firm. "Not just your name or your family. I want to know you." Anna regarded him for a moment before speaking. "You will in time. But for now, all you need to know is that I understand my role in this union. I hope you'll understand yours." Her words struck a nerve. David felt his cheeks flush with anger, but before he could respond, Anna's father cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Perhaps we should move on to dessert," he suggested, his tone light but firm. The rest of the evening passed in awkward formality, with David's parents trying to smooth over the tension while Anna remained as poised and mysterious as ever. When the evening finally ended, David walked Anna and her father to the door. As Anna turned to leave, David couldn't help himself. "Why do you act like this doesn't matter?" he asked, his voice low. Anna paused, her hand on the doorframe. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. "It matters. But not in the way you think." And with that, she stepped out into the night, leaving David standing there, his frustration mingling with a flicker of curiosity he couldn't quite shake. The day of the wedding arrived with all the grandeur and opulence one would expect from a union between two wealthy families. The venue was a sprawling estate adorned with fresh flowers and sparkling chandeliers. Guests in designer suits and gowns milled about, exchanging pleasantries and speculations. David stood at the end of the aisle, his posture rigid, his expression betraying his frustration. The ceremony, though extravagant, felt hollow to him, a stage set for a performance he had no interest in giving. When Anna entered, draped in an ornate white gown with a veil that covered her entirely, the room fell silent. Her movements were graceful, her presence commanding, but the veil remained firmly in place, concealing her face. David's jaw tightened as she approached. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room, the hushed murmurs barely hidden behind polite smiles. "She still won't take it off," someone whispered behind him. "Maybe there's a reason," another voice murmured. The ceremony proceeded with a strange formality. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, and the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, his tone warm. David hesitated, glancing at Anna. She inclined her head slightly but made no move to lift her veil. With a resigned sigh, David placed a brief kiss on the fabric covering her cheek, the gesture perfunctory and distant. Polite applause followed, but David could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken judgments of the guests. The reception was a lavish affair, held in a grand ballroom filled with champagne, music, and laughter. But the atmosphere between David and Anna remained cold. They sat at the head table, side by side yet worlds apart. David sipped his drink in silence, his eyes scanning the crowd. He caught snippets of conversations, the words cutting through the celebratory air like shards of glass. Why wouldn't she show her face? Maybe she's hiding something. Can you imagine? Marrying someone like that just for a business deal. David clenched his jaw, the shame and anger bubbling beneath the surface. He stole a glance at Anna, who remained composed, her posture elegant. She seemed utterly unfazed by the whispers, her veil still firmly in place. When the evening finally drew to a close, David and Anna were escorted to the private suite prepared for them. The tension between them was palpable as they entered the room, the door closing softly behind them. David shrugged off his jacket, tossing it onto a nearby chair. He turned to Anna, his frustration finally boiling over. "Are you going to keep that thing on forever?" he demanded, gesturing toward her veil. Anna calmly removed her gloves, placing them neatly on the dresser. "Until I'm ready," she replied, her voice even. David's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Ready? For what? To reveal whatever it is you're hiding? Or are you just enjoying this game you're playing?" Anna turned to face him, her eyes meeting his through the fabric of her veil. "This isn't a game, David, and I'm not hiding anything that matters. Not to you, maybe," he shot back. "But I'm the one standing there while people whisper about my wife like she's some kind of mystery. Do you have any idea what that's like?" Anna's gaze didn't waver. "If their opinions matter more to you than I do, then perhaps you should reconsider what this marriage is about." David's anger faltered, her words striking a nerve he hadn't expected. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I just want to know the truth, Anna. Why won't you let me see you?" "When the time is right," she said simply. "And who decides that?" "I do," she replied, her tone unwavering. David stared at her, his frustration and confusion tangling into a knot he couldn't untangle. Finally, he turned away, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from the suite's bar. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Keep your secrets, but don't expect me to wait forever." Anna didn't respond. Instead, she sat down at the vanity, removing her earrings with practiced care. Her silence filled the room, heavy and unyielding. David downed his drink, the burn doing little to ease the ache in his chest. This was not the life he had imagined, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Anna than she let on. As the night wore on, they retreated to opposite sides of the suite, the distance between them as vast as ever. But in the quiet moments before sleep, David found himself wondering, not for the first time, what lay beneath the veil. The days following their awkward wedding passed in a blur of strained silence and polite distance. David avoided Anna as much as possible, retreating to his office or taking long drives to escape the confines of the mansion. Yet, despite his frustration, he couldn't help but notice small things about her, the way she moved through the house, always graceful and composed, or the way she seemed to carry an air of quiet authority. It was during one of these moments of observation that David stumbled upon an unexpected scene. Late one morning, David was in the sunlit study, sifting through documents for a merger proposal that had hit a roadblock. His frustration mounted as he read and reread the numbers, the deal teetering on the brink of collapse. "Need some help." David looked up, startled to see Anna standing in the doorway. She wore a simple dress that flowed gracefully over her frame, and as always, her veil obscured her face. "I didn't realize you were there," he said, his tone clipped. "This isn't exactly your area of expertise." Anna tilted her head slightly, her tone calm. "You might be surprised." Before David could protest, she stepped closer, her presence quiet but commanding. She picked up one of the documents, her gloved fingers skimming over the text. "The issue isn't the numbers," she said after a moment. "It's the phrasing in this clause. It leaves too much ambiguity, which makes the other party hesitant." David frowned, leaning over to see where she was pointing. "You think that's what's holding them back?" "I don't think," she said simply. "I know. Tighten the language, specify the terms, and they'll sign." David stared at her, surprised. "How do you even know that?" Anna set the paper down, her posture relaxed. "I may not be part of your world, but that doesn't mean I'm ignorant of how it works." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving David to stare after her, the weight of her words sinking in. A few days later, David encountered Anna again in an unexpected setting. He was walking through the garden on his way to the garage when he heard laughter coming from the kitchen. Curious, he paused at the open doorway and peered inside. Anna was standing near the counter, her veil still in place, as she chatted with the kitchen staff. Her voice was warm and engaging, and the employees seemed genuinely delighted by her presence. "You've outdone yourself with the pastries today, Mrs. Hale," Anna said, her tone sincere. "They look almost too good to eat." Mrs. Hale, the head cook, beamed. "Oh, you flatter me, Mrs. Whitman. But it's true, isn't it? I've been perfecting that recipe for weeks." Anna laughed softly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Well, if you ever need a taste tester, you know where to find me." David watched as the staff responded to Anna with affection and respect, their demeanor relaxed and open. Despite the veil, she had a way of making people feel seen and valued, a trait David hadn't expected. As he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the image of Anna standing there, her warmth and poise completely at odds with the distant, enigmatic figure he had imagined her to be. Over the following weeks, David began to pay closer attention to Anna, though he would never admit it aloud. He noticed the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, the subtle but thoughtful way she contributed to the household, and the sharp intelligence that surfaced during their rare conversations. One evening, during dinner, she asked about his work, her questions surprisingly insightful. "How is the merger coming along?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. David hesitated, unsure whether to brush her off or engage. Finally, he set down his fork and sighed. "It's complicated. The other party is still hesitant, despite the changes we made." Anna nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps they need more reassurance. Have you considered hosting a meeting here? Sometimes, seeing the people behind the business can make all the difference." David blinked, startled by the suggestion. "You think that would work?" "It's worth a try," Anna said simply. To his surprise, David followed her advice, and the meeting proved successful. The deal closed shortly afterward, leaving David both relieved and bewildered. As the days turned into weeks, David found himself reevaluating his initial assumptions about Anna. She wasn't the aloof, impersonal figure he had imagined. Beneath the veil was a woman of intelligence, kindness, and depth, a woman who seemed to navigate the world with a quiet strength he hadn't expected. Yet, despite everything he had observed, the veil remained, an ever-present reminder of the distance between them. One night, as he sat alone in his study, David found himself staring out the window, his thoughts consumed by Anna. She was nothing like he had anticipated, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much he didn't know. For the first time, he wondered if the problem wasn't her reluctance to reveal herself, but his own failure to truly see. The tension between David and Anna had been building for weeks, an unspoken weight that hung in the air between them. Despite the moments of mutual respect and surprising insight, the veil remained a constant reminder of the distance that still existed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the mansion, David found himself unable to hold back any longer. He sought out Anna in the library, where she often retreated with a book in hand. She was seated in her usual chair by the window, the soft glow of a nearby lamp illuminating the veil that still concealed her face. "Anna," David began, his tone sharper than he intended. She looked up, her gray eyes calm but watchful. "Yes. We need to talk," he said, stepping closer. Anna closed her book and set it aside. "What about?" David hesitated, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why do you keep hiding behind that veil? Do you think I can't handle seeing you? That I'm too shallow to accept whatever it is you're so afraid to show?" Anna's gaze didn't falter, but David noticed the slightest flicker of emotion in her eyes. "This isn't about you, David," she said quietly. "Then what is it about?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like some sort of test, like you're trying to see how long I'll tolerate being married to a mystery." Anna stood, her movements controlled but deliberate. She turned away from him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "It's not a test," she said softly. "Then why?" David pressed, stepping closer. "Why won't you let me see you? Do you think I'm not mature enough to handle the truth? Or is it that you don't trust me?" Anna's shoulders tensed, and for a moment David thought she might leave the room without answering. But when she finally turned to face him, her eyes were filled with a quiet intensity that made him pause. "Do you really want to know why, David?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with an edge he hadn't heard before. "Yes," he said firmly. "Because I wanted you to see me for who I am," she said, her tone unwavering. "Not for what I look like, or what others say about me, but for the person I am beneath all of that. And I hoped, that you might be willing to look beyond the surface." Her words struck him like a blow, the weight of them sinking into his chest. Anna continued, her voice quieter now. "But it seems I was wrong. All this time you've been fixated on what you can't see, instead of what's right in front of you." David opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time he realized how shallow and judgmental he had been. He had spent so much energy resenting the veil, convincing himself that it was a barrier between them, that he had failed to see the depth of the person wearing it. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna's expression softened, though her eyes still held a trace of sadness. "I'm not asking for an apology, David. I'm asking for patience and understanding." David nodded, his throat tight. "I've been a fool," he admitted. I judged you for something I didn't understand. And I made this about me when it was never about me to begin with." Anna's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "We all have our blind spots," she said. "The question is whether we're willing to see past them." For the first time, David felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps they could move forward together. "I want to try," he said earnestly, "to really see you. Not just what's under the veil, but everything you are." Anna regarded him for a moment, her eyes searching his. Then she nodded, her voice soft but resolute. "Then we'll start there." As she turned back to her chair and picked up her book, David felt a sense of calm settle over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he was ready to face it, not as a man fixated on appearances, but as someone willing to understand the woman he had married. And though the veil remained, David realized that it no longer defined her. It was simply one part of a much larger story, a story he was finally ready to learn. Over the following weeks, David made a conscious effort to change. His conversations with Anna lingered in his mind, and he realized that if he wanted their marriage to work, he needed to approach her with patience and genuine curiosity. One morning over breakfast, he decided to take the first step. "Anna," he began, setting his coffee cup down, "I've been thinking about what you said, about seeing who you are." Anna looked up from her plate, her gray eyes meeting his through the veil. "And? I'd like you to be more involved in the business," he said, his tone earnest. "You have a sharp mind, and I could use your perspective on a few projects. If you're interested, that is." Anna regarded him quietly, as though searching for any hint of insincerity. Finally, she nodded. "I'd be happy to help." David felt a small sense of relief, though he didn't let it show. "Great. There's a meeting this afternoon about the Whitman merger. I think your insights could be valuable." That afternoon, Anna joined David in the conference room for the first time. The executives were initially surprised to see her, and their curiosity was palpable, though none dared comment on her veil. As the discussion unfolded, Anna listened intently, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When David turned to her for input, she spoke with clarity and confidence. "The issue isn't just about profit margins," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "It's about sustainability. If you want this partnership to last, you need to show the Whitmans that you're invested in their long-term success, not just your own." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed her words. David watched as the executives nodded in agreement, clearly impressed. Later, as they walked back to his office, David turned to Anna. "You were incredible in there," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Anna tilted her head slightly. "I was just honest." "Sometimes that's exactly what people need," David replied. Over time, David found himself seeking Anna's advice more and more. She had a way of cutting through the noise and identifying the core of a problem, whether it was a business deal or a personal matter. One evening, as they reviewed a proposal together in the study, David paused to watch her. She was focused, her gloved fingers skimming the pages as she jotted down notes. "You're good at this," he said, breaking the silence. Anna glanced up, her eyes softening. "I've had good teachers." David smiled, realizing that her humility was yet another layer to the woman he was beginning to understand. Their growing partnership extended beyond business. David started to notice Anna's subtle kindness in her interactions with the household staff, and her thoughtfulness in the little things she did for him, like leaving a cup of tea on his desk during late-night work sessions or suggesting books she thought he might enjoy. In return, David began to show his appreciation in small but meaningful ways. He made an effort to ask about her day, to include her in decisions, and to show her that her presence mattered. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, David turned to Anna. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, his tone tentative. "Why did you agree to marry me? You didn't have to." Anna was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the flowers swaying in the breeze. "Because I saw potential in you," she said finally. "I saw someone who could be more than they realized." David felt a lump rise in his throat. "And have I lived up to that?" Anna's eyes met his, a hint of warmth in her expression. "You're getting there." Despite their progress, the veil remained, a silent reminder of the distance that still existed between them. One night, as they sat by the fireplace, David decided to broach the subject again. "Anna," he began carefully, "I don't want to push you, but do you think you'll ever take the veil off?" Anna didn't look away, her voice steady. "When the time is right." David nodded, though a flicker of disappointment stirred in his chest. "I understand. I want you to know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." For the first time, Anna reached out and placed a hand on his. "Thank you," she said softly. In that moment, David realized that the veil was no longer the barrier he had once believed it to be. It was simply a part of her story, a story she would share when she was ready. And until that day came, he would wait, trusting that their growing bond was worth the patience it required. The grand ballroom of the Whitman estate was alive with the sounds of music, laughter, and clinking glasses. Chandeliers cast warm light over the crowd of elegantly dressed guests, and the evening buzzed with anticipation. David had spared no expense in organizing the gala, a celebration of the success of the Whitman merger and the future of his growing empire. David stood near the stage, engaging in polite conversation with a group of investors, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He glanced at the grand staircase every few minutes, wondering when, or if, Anna would make her entrance. She had been uncharacteristically quiet about her plans for the evening, and her absence was beginning to draw murmurs among the guests. "Your wife isn't joining us tonight?" one of the investors asked, his tone curious but polite. "She'll be here," David replied, though even he wasn't entirely sure. At that moment, the soft hum of conversation began to fade as all eyes turned to the staircase. David followed their gazes, his breath catching as Anna appeared at the top of the steps. She was dressed in a flowing emerald gown that shimmered in the light, perfectly tailored to her slender frame. But it wasn't her gown that drew the collective gasp from the crowd, it was the fact that for the first time her face was uncovered. Anna descended the staircase with the grace of someone who had commanded attention her entire life. Her face, now fully visible, revealed striking features, high cheekbones, luminous skin, and a pair of gray eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone far beyond her years. David stood frozen, his heart pounding as she approached. He barely registered the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. "She's stunning. Why would she hide a face like that?" Anna reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, her eyes scanning the room before settling on David. She smiled faintly and began walking toward him, the crowd parting like the sea to let her through. When she finally reached him, David managed to find his voice, though it was softer than he intended. "Anna, why now?" Anna looked at him, her expression calm but resolute. "Because it was time," she said simply. She turned to address the room, her voice carrying easily over the hushed silence. "I know many of you have wondered why I've kept my face hidden," she began, her tone steady but filled with quiet emotion. "Some of you may have even assumed the worst, that I was hiding a scar, a deformity, or something shameful. But the truth is far simpler." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I wore the veil because I wanted to be seen for who I am, not for what I look like, but for my thoughts, my values, and my actions. Too often we judge others based on appearances, and I didn't want that to define me or my marriage." Her words hung in the air, the crowd riveted by her honesty. Anna turned back to David, her voice softening. "I kept the veil because I needed to know if you could see beyond